Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Pretty much halfway through the summer break, the Dutch Grand Prix is coming up next, and Mercedes are confident they can make 3 out of 4 race victories over the last 4 rounds into 4 out of 5 race victories in Max Verstappen's backyard. Andrew Chauvelin from Mercedes says that after doing all the testing and the data and the analysis over the last couple of weeks since the Belgian Grand Prix, they've confirmed that their upgrades they brought, they eventually took off the car as the weekend went on, actually did work as intended, and will be back on the car for Zandvoort and what potentially could be another race win. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get through today. Firstly, Liberty Media. They are under fire again, mainly around the Andretti situation. But good news for them, they're making loads of money. The sprint races, the additional races on the calendar up to 24 this year means they made more money than ever, really, in the second quarter. £682 million of revenue in the second quarter of 2024, boosted, of course, by 8 races in that period. But on the negative side, they are catching some heat, not just, from the community, but from the United States Department of Justice, which is a rather big deal if you weren't aware. So they are looking into Liberty Media's rejection of Andretti Global. This has been a big saga. It continues onwards. Andretti say, look, we don't care. We are continuing our work at pace with the intention to get into Formula 1 for probably like 2028 or something. That's the new plan, with Cadillac, General Motors coming on board as like their engine supplier. And, well, who knows what's going to happen. But it's been lots of drama emerging over the last 12 months or so, really, especially when there were rumours that Greg Maffei, we'll hear from him in just a second, basically told Michael Andretti, I'm going to make sure that you do not get into this sport. So that seems, is it personal? Is it business? I don't know. All I do know is that the Department of Justice are concerned about effectively antitrust, because Liberty Media seem to have rejected Andretti, despite the fact that Andretti ticked all the boxes, right? The FIA went through their assessment to join and they said, yeah, looks all good. They are cleared. They have the green light from us. But Liberty say no from an economic perspective, or basically they said, we don't think they're going to be very good and therefore we're going to reject them, which, well, Haas are on the grid, even though they've got better, to be fair. Sauber are on the grid, and yes, they've got Audi coming in, but they've been terrible for the last couple of seasons and probably will be next year as well. Is there any evidence to really suggest that Andretti will be less competitive than some of those teams? I don't really think so. And even then, we know that the real reason why they've rejected them is because they've got to split the pie 11 ways rather than 10 ways as it presently is. So basically the US government is saying, all right, are we sure this is fair? Are they trying to create a monopoly, right, by not allowing anybody else in, which would violate antitrust regulation, that type of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of the type of discussions that are going on, and the Department of Justice is doing an investigation into this. Maffei has to tell the shareholders what's going on here and says, we intend to fully cooperate with the investigation, including any related requests for information. We believe our determination, F1's determination, was in compliance with all applicable US antitrust laws, and we have detailed the rationale for our decision via the Andretti in prior statements. And then he says, oh, we're definitely not against any expansion. We would expand if the right criteria were met. And Andretti clearly didn't, reach their criteria or whatever. So that's the issue right now that Liberty Media might have to deal with. And, they're not going to be happy about this. It's going to make them probably even more frustrated with Andretti. Not like this is on Andretti necessarily, but I'm sure the lawyers involved are going to be getting paid well. And maybe Andretti did speak to the relevant people in government, because, America, General Motors, like if General Motors has a desire for something, then, the US government is going to listen to them because it's General Motors. So I think this is going to be quite interesting to see what happens next on this and whether it gets upheld or whether there's anything in it and, F1 are forced to accept an 11th entry. And if they're not, then maybe Andretti might buy Alpine or whatever. Those are the current rumours going around. Quickly on the driver market, Valtteri Bottas is a bit concerned, and I think for good reason, what his future is in the sport. His return to Williams is off the cards now because Sainz has gone there. His only real option is to stay at Sauber alongside Nico Hülkenberg. But there's drama at Sauber with Audi, the leadership changes, everything like that. What does Jonathan Wheatley think? What does Mattia Binotto think about keeping Bottas on? It's difficult to say, but he says, yeah, complicated situation right now. Of course, the Haas move is off the table as well. Behrman and, of course, Ocon are locked in for next year. And even Ayako Matsu was talking about the culture changes that he's generated at Haas. And look, in large part, the car that he, had this year was not necessarily a car that he, led the charge on designing, because he only came in as a team principal, right at the start of the season, pretty much when the car was already ready. But I think there's no doubt that the progress they've made, the mid-season upgrades, should be attributed in large part to the changes that Komatsu has made at that team. And Gunther Steiner, as a result, has been, catching a fair bit of criticism for his time at the team. He even revealed, Steiner, that he tried to sign Checo Perez for Haas in the past, tried to sign him twice because he's a good driver. He was a good driver at the time. His behaviour in the team was very good. He got on with people, which is always important. He was just a solid driver. But he also says, I don't expect to see Checo back in the car after the summer break. I think 90% of people said that. Of course, they've confirmed that he will be back in the car, but who knows really for how much longer at this point. There is a theory that after the next 4 races, there's another pretty sizable 3-week gap, at which point maybe that's when they're going to make the decision. I think there was a general feeling in the paddock that this, Perez out change was almost a done deal, and then the rumour is that, Carlos Slim came along and waved the wallet around, and then things changed slightly. Another reason to believe, by the way, that Kimi Antonelli may well be going to Mercedes, just because of all the media buzz around this. We heard this talked about yesterday, and then today, Autosport did a big exclusive with Kimi Antonelli, and it goes on for quite a bit. I'll link it down below if you guys want to check it out. A few interesting things were said in here, but I just think, it feels like the kind of publications are prepping some of these articles in preparation for what is likely going to be an announcement in the near future. This is the interesting quote, really saying, I'm not afraid of being judged. He even made some interesting assessments on what happened at the Silverstone Grand Prix weekends, because he had a disappointing qualifying there, and apparently he then had a call with Toto Wolff, and after that conversation, he, gains back his confidence, and then the next day he goes in and absolutely dominates the sprint race there in the wet conditions, and then went on to win the feature race in Budapest right shortly after that. So that I thought was quite an interesting assessment, really. And, the general feeling is that, probably Antonelli's going to be the next Mercedes driver. But if it wasn't for that conversation with Toto, maybe things would have been rather different. Of course, there's always going to be discussion around this, because it's not like he's dominating Formula 2 or anything. But there's been loads of discussions on Formula 2 lately, how valid it really is. Even for the likes of Paul Aron, his engine exploded or whatever it was in Austria. The Mechachrome engines that just are not very good. It isn't, I would say, Formula 2 the best championship to determine driver skill. And there's even been a lot of talk lately that the idea that it's a spec series and all the cars are the same just isn't true. Certainly not this year, when there's been, brand new set of regulations in Formula 2. And also Prema, let's not forget, they are setting up their IndyCar project. There is a bit of a feeling that they might have transitioned plenty of their personnel who usually work on a very, very successful Formula 2, Formula 3, etc., project, transferred them over to developing their IndyCar team with Chevrolet, and therefore didn't really nail it this year. So I think what's best to confirm is when you look at, the wet conditions, for example, how Antonelli does there, when it kind of evens the playing field to some degree, people tend to say, and also how he's doing compared to Behrman, also highly rated, who right now he's obviously in a good spot against in that championship race. But let's talk about the Red Bull versus Mercedes thing, because there's a general feeling that Verstappen, if things keep going as they are, is looking more and more fondly at the future potentially at Mercedes. But as we talked about yesterday, if Mercedes have got the deal done, Antonelli signed, it's due to be announced at Monza, then is there room for Verstappen? Not this year, potentially. Tsunoda, though, is obviously still looking at that Red Bull promotion, and who knows, it's probably not going to happen this year, but if Max were to leave, then maybe it's on the cards, right? I think the tough thing is for Yuki that I just can't see him ever getting that Red Bull promotion unless Max leaves. I honestly think that's the only way that it happens at this point. There were further rumours today that the Verstappen camp is actually targeting a 2026 move to Mercedes when the new engine regulations come around. That, the feeling is that Mercedes are almost certainly going to have a stronger power unit than Red Bull will with their own Red Bull powertrains, and that's probably going to be quite important. So maybe Max is now looking at 2026, depending how the relative trajectory goes over the next 12 months or so with the cars. And we are going to get a further indication as to what's happening here when we go to Zandvoort. So Helmut Marko is saying, look, in qualifying, which is critical at Zandvoort, the car's been pretty good. Obviously in Spa, Max was on pole by 0.6 of a second. Yes, it was wet conditions. Yes, he was running higher downforce, so maybe that contributed to the advantage. But nonetheless, Max should be there or thereabouts for the pole position in Zandvoort, and he needs a good qualifying if he wants to win the race. He's obviously pretty much dominated it around Zandvoort over the last few years, and this year would be a great opportunity for somebody else to take that top spot. I'm sure that Hamilton would love the opportunity, because in 2022, Hamilton had a chance to win there. It looked like he was potentially going to be able to make it on the one stop on the hards. Who knows whether he would have been able to hold on, but the safety car effectively squandered the chances there. And yes, Max got a great run into turn one and took the lead immediately, but even if it wasn't the case, Hamilton was kind of screwed, right, given the tyres that he was left out on. He wasn't very happy about it. Russell took the pit stop. You guys probably remember that 2022 race, but the one stop was on there. The Mercedes W13 actually had better tyre management than basically any other car on the grid at that time, and it gave the opportunity for Hamilton to maybe win at Zandvoort, but the safety car kind of squandered any of those chances at the end of the day. Last year, of course, there was no chance, and then this year maybe the opportunity is there yet again for somebody else but Max to win. The problem is, of course, that Red Bull do not have the same car advantage at all that they had last year and the year before, and even Helmut Marko says a couple of interesting things here, that they can't work on the car during the summer break because it's the summer holidays, the summer break. That's the whole point about it. We have to solve our problems and find out where we went wrong, because the RB20 has lost its balance if you compare it to the first three races. It is difficult to estimate how long it will take us to do so. I don't think the big solution will come in Zandvoort. We are brainstorming intensively and we have several ideas as well, but I cannot yet say what we will implement and how. So very interesting assessment, I thought, from Helmut Marko. He does usually say it's how it is, at least as far as he's concerned. Whether it's actually how it is, who knows? But he usually is pretty blunt, Marko, about what he thinks. This is, I thought, was quite fascinating though, right? Because on paper, why not just make the RB20 what it was at the start of the season? Like, isn't that kind of logical that, oh, the RB20's lost its balance compared to the start of the year? Well, just go back to how it was, either revert some upgrades or whatever. Makes me think that these whole theories about they had to change something on the car, whatever, gains a bit more weight to me, because if the Red Bull was so good at the start of the season, the balance was great, Verstappen and Perez weren't complaining, now they're complaining all the time. Like, have the upgrades just categorically failed? Because if they have, then you might want to revert them a little bit, at least to some degree. But if you're not reverting them, then maybe it shows that there's more to it than meets the eye. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of an interesting statement there from Marko, really, on the fact that the Red Bull has just lost its balance. And of course, who knows whether it'll be able to regain it. But the big talking point really is going to be Mercedes, because while on average McLaren have had the strongest package over the last few rounds, Ferrari have, unfortunately for them, kind of been in no man's land, substantially faster than Aston Martin, but not good enough to ever really fight for a victory since Monaco. Leclerc, of course, did a great job, and obviously Sainz was in the lead for some time back at Spa, but apart from that, there wasn't really an opportunity. It's been McLaren, and now it's been Mercedes, right? I'm sure McLaren will look at the last 8 rounds, they'll look at the last 4 rounds, and they'll say, wow, there were opportunities there we should have won. But Austria, Silverstone, and then, of course, most recently in Belgium, Mercedes won all of those Grand Prix. Luck was on their side to some degree. Certainly Austria, for example, shouldn't have been a Mercedes win, but it was because of the crash between Max and Lando towards the end of that Grand Prix. So bouncing, though, is back in business, and Ferrari have suffered with this, and this is the problem now in this part of the regulation cycle. Fascinating how it works, right? At the start of the regulations, bouncing, porpoising was a big issue because the teams, just apart from Red Bull really, didn't have the best suspension set up to manage the problem that porpoising creates when it's kind of a natural thing. The floor is close to the ground, it generates downforce, it's going to suck the car towards the ground, and if it, basically keeps going, then the floor's going to hit the ground, it's going to stall, then it's going to bounce up again, rinse and repeat. Very challenging thing to actually make the car not bounce with ground effect, especially when the tracks aren't perfectly level, there's camera on the tracks, you get bumps and you get curbs and all these other things that are going to cause problems. The teams managed to deal with that over the first year and a half, 2 years of the regulations, but now they're at a point where the teams are pretty satisfied with where they are. It's now about chasing every last bit of downforce, and this is why Ferrari introduced an upgrade which increases downforce but triggers the bouncing effect to return, and Mercedes had the same thing when they tried their new upgrades in Spa. Friday was a disaster for them. It looked awful, the car was nowhere, they had no pace at all, and for Saturday they decided to take off the new upgrades and go back to what they previously had, and guess what? They won the race with Hamilton, and arguably it could have been a 1-2 with their Silverstone spec that they used. But Chauvelin says the new floor will return to Zandvoort because after analysing the data, they are pretty confident, Chauvelin says, that the new parts will prove their worth there. That's because Mercedes said after the weekend it actually wasn't about the new upgrade packages they put on the floor and the other parts of the car. It was just that they got the setup wrong on Friday, and regardless if they had the old package or the new, they would have been slow on Friday because they just got it wrong. They fixed it for Saturday, and of course from then on the weekend was absolutely flawless, and the results speak for themselves at that point. But it was interesting that Mercedes say, yeah, having looked at the data over the last couple of weeks, because this is what they said after the weekends. They were like, yeah, we're pretty sure those upgrades, we're actually working as intended. We just got something wrong. And now they say, okay, we've gone back to the factory, we've looked at the data, and now we're pretty confident that, yeah, they actually did work as intended. They did bring the additional downforce. The question is whether they can get the setup right. The advantage they potentially have is that there's not a sprint race in Zandvoort, so they can bide their time. They've got the 3 practice sessions to set up the car, and if it works as intended, of course, they're going to be in a fantastic spot to potentially try and win another Grand Prix. Quali will be massively important, of course. Overtaking is going to be a serious challenge, as it always is, but who knows what's going to happen with the weather. Of course, the safety car effect. We've seen some dramatic moments over the last couple of years. The start of last year's race was complete chaos, if you guys remember last year, and of course 2022, as I said, the safety car related drama, the Yuki Tsunoda related, letting him out of the pit lane or whatever related drama was certainly causing quite a lot of discussion. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Just to mention a couple of updates on the race fans driver rankings. 12th place, just ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, who was 13th, goes to Valtteri Bottas, and I think they put Zhou in 17th, so this is probably about right, really. I think Bottas has done actually rather well this season. He's been very anonymous because the car's been terrible, and obviously the pit stops at the start of the season were like 20 seconds a pop, so that wasn't ideal either. But I think Bottas has done enough to earn a seat back on the Formula 1 grid. I'm just not sure at this point that it's actually going to happen. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.